was at the Zac Brown concert, along with about 10,000 other people. And so if you aren't familiar with the band, they basically play modern country music. And so I was trying to think, okay, what kind of music do they play? And so I looked up to see how the band would actually describe what they play. And they said that they play your basic country, southern rock, bluegrass, reggae jam, which I thought covered just about everything, except for maybe rap music, which is okay with me because it's really not the type of music that I gravitate towards. Well, not long into the concert, I turned and looked around at all the people gathered there. And the people were all singing and dancing, and they were holding one another, and some were sitting quietly. Some were making a ruckus in the aisles and carrying on, while others wiped away tears. I saw more people kissing in public in a good way than I typically do. And we had all come there for different reasons. I'm sure that some were like Zac Brown band groupies, and some were celebrating birthdays or anniversaries. Some were just wanting to hear some good music or blow off some steam. All ages and types were gathered there under the pavilion. But no matter what your reason for being there, it was a night to sing. To sing loud and long. So initially, as I read the scripture for this week, I was drawn to Hannah's song, is what that prayer at the end is typically called. It's called Hannah's song. Drawn to her joy, drawn to her devotion to God, and frankly, drawn to her stark honesty. Well, I don't always do this. But sometimes when I can sort of feel a texture in a scripture, I'll look for that feel or that thought out in the world. So I knew this week that this sermon couldn't be fully written until I sat in the concert hall. I was aware of that throughout the week. So when I went to the concert, I went with Hannah, the singing and praying woman in my heart. So there was this point in the concert where the band was doing just like a little jam session, and there weren't any words to sing along to. It was just music. And it was mostly unfamiliar, because the band was improvising as they went along. Well, we had all been standing and singing, and now we sat and we listened to what was going on around us. And I thought about Hannah. Hannah, when she begins to pray to God, when she pours all her pain out, she prays in silence, with her lips moving, but adding no sound to the song. Because we actually, our scripture that we're given, it skips. It skips a couple verses. And we miss the bit in scripture where it says that Eli the priest thinks she's drunk, and he ridicules her. He thinks she's just a mad woman who's talking to herself at the foot of the temple. And he can't see or hear her pleas. And he can't see or hear her song. So Hannah is, in her prayer, a woman who is not heard. And yet she has a song to sing. I thought about how no sound escaped from her lips, and how all of us were there, not singing. And then I realized that all the people, they were not singing, but their lips were moving. They were talking to their neighbors, and the song went on around them. Their words were intertwined there. Not really part of the melody or even part of the harmony, but they were an undercurrent to to all that was going on there. The song is also words, and it's also silence. And so I sat there, and I listened for God. And it's true that I danced, and I sang, and I laughed, and I even cried a tiny bit when they played my favorite song. And I was there with my friend, and I had told her ahead of time that I was sort of working that night, because I was going to be listening for God. So as I whipped out my iPhone to take notes on, I said, "I just got my God thing." And she laughed. And the God thing was dissonance. Discord between the wailing prayer of being forgotten and barren, and the joyous song of remembrance and fulfillment. Because it seems as if there is a cavern between the two, and yet they speak so well to one another, joy and despair. And I think as I sat there, I realized that the reason the song sings so beautifully is because the prayer cuts so deeply. And that dissonance is where God's voice is heard, where God's melody rings brighter. It's not that God's not singing all the other times too, but that when our voices are quieter, then God is clearer. And that was the heartbeat. That even when our singing stopped, the song went on. And then they sang this perfect lyric of a new song that I didn't know, that summed it up. And if I could carry a tune, although this morning I am being forced to carry a tune a bit more than usual, but if I could, you would hear the loveliness and the poignancy much better. But the band sang. I believe that I was born with a song inside. And I never question why anymore. Just keep on singing those melodies. And that's it. We are all born with songs inside. Born with prayers inside. Born with conversation inside to murmur into the song that God's composing. So I sat there realizing that the songs we sing to God aren't always heard by anyone but ourselves and God. And that melodies don't always involve words. And I thought of Hannah, how very desperately alone she must have felt as she was shamed for her prayers and her needs were dismissed by her husband. How her needs may have seemed insignificant to everyone around her, but they were everything to her. You know how sometimes things happen which are just perfect in their timing? Well, that's what happened next in this split second. A singer came out who I'm fairly certain was not part of the band. And he was rapping. Remember, rap is not my thing. And suddenly we were all back on our feet. And we were no longer silent. But there he was on the stage, and he was dancing, and he was singing up a storm, and he had one word to say to us. Jump. I'm not kidding you. Jump, jump, jump. And he sang it with such passion and determination and meaning that, I kid you not, 10,000 people were jumping. And we were singing, and we were clapping, and we were drawn into his song. And we were all about his song, no matter whether we liked to rap or not. And it wasn't so much that we cared about jumping, but it was because he did. We heard because his song mattered to him. It was really simple. And that's how it is with God. What matters to us matters to God. Now, it would be really easy to look at this scripture and say that what happened here is Hannah somehow prayed rightly. And she got what she wanted. She was given her child. And it is true that she was gifted with a child. But that isn't what Hannah's song says about God. Her song, when she sings, never, ever mentions the baby. The song is a response to what God has given her. And what God gives her is God gives her back her life. And that's what we all want. To truly live life. There are so many things out in the world to break our hearts and to make them sing, that if we aren't hearing them, if our melodies aren't joining that song, then we aren't listening. We've left the concert. And Hannah, she wants to be part of the concert. And her song sings life. But not just life. Also has these deep, deep underpinnings of suffering. The elation is so great because the pain had been so deep. As she sang, so pure and true, she knew that God was somehow there, as she had ground her knees into the dirt and wept with confusion. Her song says that God heard that. And for God to have heard that, he must have been there, at least in earshot. Well, not even, right? Not even within earshot. Because if you remember, she was hardly making a sound. God was as close to her as the breath which escaped her lips. Her utterances must have brushed against God's ears as puffs of air. You can hold that for one moment, that she was very, very quiet. And God came and knelt so very, very close just to hear her piece of the song. I imagine these little trickles pouring out of her, hardly audible, but when it catches your ear, it's like that wind chime. You just catch and it sends chills down your spine. That piece would get lost if we only sang the praise. I don't like this piece, but I think that it may be impossible to know true joy without having known true despair. It's the dissonance of the song, the minor chords which may seem a little out of place and yet echo every human soul. And those send these reverberations out through the great concert hall of life. Well, there was one song that I wanted to hear, my favorite song. And the concert was nearing the end, and I don't want to say that I needed them to play it, but I did. And it's one of those songs that, as it's played, it pulls at different parts of my life. And it reminds me of different people. And then they played it. And rushes of thoughts and maybe prayers filled my head. And I put my arm around my friend and sang. And it occurred to me that we were all there, listening to the same music, singing the same words. But we were each hearing something entirely different. We each heard our songs within their song, our dreams within their melodies, and our heartaches within their harmonies. And gathered there, our songs intertwined into one, joining the pulse of God's song. Because Hannah's prayer must break our hearts, and her song must raise us up. Because her prayer is our prayer, and her song is our song. And that love and life that she is graced with is also the love and the life that we are graced by. That's the promise. that God has knelt this close to us in Jesus. So close that it is his song that is whispered in our ears when we don't know where to turn. And he says to us, sing and weep and pray, for I always hear. Amen.